Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the show. This looks better. Right, there's the sign when the date when it took place, towards, we hope, the close of the COVID era. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a continuation of where we left off yesterday. Yesterday we introduced the first three players of the macroeconomic problem. The macroeconomic problem of, firstly, how the government should be handling things like inflation. Secondly, how the government should be handling things like employment. And thirdly, what the government should be doing towards inequality of wealth. Those, right, some people having more than others. Those are the introductory points. Those are the focus. We also looked at how macroeconomics works. We looked at the following. We looked at price level, we looked at GDP, and then we looked at aggregate demand, right, which shows a relationship between price level and GDP. Today we're going to take it one stage further and look at the fourth player and the most complex player, which is aggregate supply. So let's summarize that with a quick diagram. Right, what we did last lesson was we will have a look at the macroeconomic key diagram. PL, right, price level, Y equals GDP. And we said last lesson that the aggregate demand, which is the total demand for all goods and services produced by the national economy, is there. Now, we also said that the aggregate demand has got four components. And the four components are consumers, have investors, right? Investors want goods and services, consumers want goods and services, government wants goods and services, and foreigners, which is exports, because we export to foreigners. We also buy from foreigners as well. So it's X take away M, which can sometimes be a plus value if the country exports more, and it can sometimes be a minus value. We also said that when the price level goes up to, let's say the price level is here, right? We also said that when the price level goes up, for various reasons, that means that the demand for goods and services will tend to go down. The aggregate demand for goods and services will tend to go down. What we're now going to do is we're going to move on to have a look at aggregate supply, otherwise known as AS. And AS is a more, sorry, let's use red, better colour, red. And that's not just because it's difficult, it just somehow seems to suit the aggregate supply curve. Now, AS is a debate amongst economies as to what the supply curve looks like. Why is this important? Because when the government decide to do something, to manipulate the economy, they need to know whether it's going to improve the aggregate supply or not. And sometimes, if they get the shape of the aggregate supply curve wrong, any government efforts could actually do a great deal of harm, even though they're well-meaning. So an understanding of the shape of the supply curve, which we're going to be introducing, is what we're going to be introducing is vital, for considering any change or policy that the government might want to use in order to fine-tune the economy. For example, if the economy is in a state of unemployment and it's underperforming, then the government might decide, for example, to lower the taxes. But if that may result just in inflation and may not affect unemployment at all. In other words, it all depends on the shape of the aggregate supply. Let's firstly say what AS, which is aggregate supply, let's firstly say what it is. The aggregate supply is what the national economy, the total value of goods and services. Right? Now that is, so far we've, actually that is correct, the total supply of goods and services. We don't want to mix it with the GDP. Right? We will distinguish it soon. Let's firstly take this diagram off, and we're going to consider the aggregate supply curves. So start up again, AS, SAM, PL, Y equals GDP, and here we go. Now we're going to do a complex one first, right? The complex one, because this tries to simulate what actually happens, right? How aggregate supply works in practice. We've got one section here, right, which is perfectly elastic. It's parallel to the x-axis. We've got one section here, which is perfectly inelastic, right, which is parallel to the y-axis. And then we've got a sloping section here. So that they are, we will call this the AS for the time being. Later on we're going to question whether this is in fact the AS, but we'll keep it for the time being. Let us assume that this AD and your price level, use the black for that, is over here, just for this stage. PL and 1 and Y1. We will come back to this and look at it a little bit more depth when we consider other curves, but at this moment, let's assume that that's the state of the economy, or that's the ideal state of the economy. Now, so we'll call that AD1. Let us say that there has been a recession, which means that for some reason or other, people aren't spending money. It could even be during COVID. What can happen is that the AD moves to the left. And we'll call that AD, all right, let's call it AD2. It's moved to the left. So that means that the price level has gone down, has gone down. Right? The inflation level, so we call that PL2. And here we'll call this Y2. So that's actually good news. It's good news for those who are spending money, that because there's less money chasing goods and services, the overall cost of living, the price of living, has gone down and has moved from AD1 to AD2. Now, let us assume that the government, that's the good news. The bad news is that it has gone from Y1 to Y2. That means less is being produced. And if less is being produced, that would mean that they need fewer people to produce it, which means you're going to be getting unemployment. So if the AD1 goes to AD2 and the GDP goes down, right, to Y2, it means that price levels might go down, or at least inflation won't go up that quickly. Right? You're going to be getting either disinflation or deflation. That's good news for shoppers. But at the same time, it's not going to help people that haven't got that much money to spend if they're not earning money, because there's going to be more unemployment. The government is now under pressure to do something about it. Well, let's see what's going to happen when the government is under pressure, to do something about it. Let us say the government decides that this is a bad situation and we need to move the AD to the right to get it out of recession. Still on the horizontal, perfectly elastic part of the AD curve. And we've moved AD2 to AD3. What's happened to the price level? Is there any change? No, prices are the same. You see what's happened? The government has reduced the taxes, and in reducing the taxes, people are prepared to spend more money. You understand? They've got more money in their pockets. We will look in more detail at the various tools that the government can use to move either the aggregate demand, or as we will see later, the aggregate supply. We will look at that in future episodes. Right now we're just picking one example that the government decides to reduce the taxes. right, the direct taxes. So that means people have got more money in their pocket and they're spending more money. Is that going to help the unemployment? It is, because they're going to be fewer unemployed. Going to be at Y3. But what's the cost going to be of this? Does it mean that we've got inflation? No. It means that the government is likely to be wholly successful. Put a nice little smiley there. Why is it going to be wholly successful? Because think about it. Once upon a time, the economy was functioning here. Now it's gone down into recession. Now, when it's in recession, what's going to happen? People aren't buying things. Let's look at the factors of production. Land, labour and capital. The price of land is low. The price of labour is low. The price of capital is low, the factors of production nationwide. People are sitting there on them, wanting to rent out their properties, wanting to supply goods and services, there are no buyers. Suddenly, people decide that the government reduces the taxes. So there's going to be a line of people that have suddenly got money to spend. So the people who've got properties to rent say, yippee, I can get an income on my property now. They're not going to put up the price of the property. People who are going to be supplying the capital, right, and the raw materials for producing goods and services, they're not going to start putting prices up. They're going to be jolly glad with whatever we get. Labour, that's the worst one in many ways. Right, people are not going to say, I'm only going to come back to work, right, if I'm going to get better wages. On the contrary, they're jolly pleased to be back at work. So there will be no rise in the cost of the factors of production. This is because the economy, this area between AD2 and AD2, Y2 and Y3, is actually what we would call spare capacity. When the economy is in a state of spare capacity, right, it means that everything's there, right? We only wish we could get rid of it. It's not costing us that much more to produce it. We've got the buildings, right? We've got people who are prepared to work. They're not going to ask for rising prices, right? It's all okay. Right? Factories are just reopening. You don't have to build new factories. They're there. They were closed down because of the recession. Shops were closed down because of the recession. It's spare capacity waiting there, just sitting there. So the prices aren't going to go up because everybody's going to say, yippee, we're opening, we're back to work again. Like is going on in this country, which seems to be now, at the wake of at the end of the COVID. That's what we hope is the end of the COVID crisis, and everybody's back to work. The economy moves from Y2 to Y3. Everybody is happy. So far, so good. However, the aggregate demand curve does not continue to go like this. Because when the economy is getting closer and closer to full employment, right, which means that employing the right number of people that the economy needs and things climb, people change their tune. Let's say that the government says that we really want to get it back to AD1. So what's the government going to do? The government said, we'll give another reduction in taxes, or we'll give businesses various things, and we'll make it more comfortable for people to go to work, and we might perhaps increase the minimum wage, and so on, to be able to get people back to work. What's going to happen? Prices are going to go up. Let's look at the factors of production. Firstly, land. The price of land is going to go up because people are going to push the rents up. Labour. People are going to want to be paid more. Capital, right? People are going to be supplying various machines and other things, only at slightly higher prices. So the aggregate demand as it moves to here means that you're going to be getting more people working and more people in inflation. So therefore it has this particular shape of the curve. As it moves to that stage, it's on the sloping thing. When it gets to this stage, which is AD4, the economy is actually going to be employing more people, but it's well over capacity, so therefore you're going to be getting inflation up to here, and it's at PL4, right? And over down here, what's going to be happening is that, this is Y4, that there's going to be less unemployment, but look at it. There's less unemployment because the economy is expanded at Y4, but look what's going on here. Prices are going up. So there might be a little smiley here. There you go. More people at work. Often the people that are less profitable, but there's been a zook up in the prices, and it's not going to be very happy over there. We're going to be getting inflation. And then what happens is that the government doesn't quite realise what's going on, and it might even reduce taxes further or cut interest rates at the same time, and you get more people at work, perhaps hoping to move to Wi-Fi. It's not going to happen, you know why? Because beyond a certain point, the economy cannot expand. And if you're going to pay more people, you're going to get more money chasing the same amount of goods, and you're going to end up with this. Because you are on the perfectly inelastic part of the curve. And therefore, its prices are going to be going up to PL5. Now, why is this so important? Because governments, in the last century, and certainly today, one of the main key points of governments is their economic policy, and how are they going to be encouraging aggregate demand, as we say later, aggregate supply, to move? Is it necessary? Now, it can make a big, let's say the government decides to reduce let's say there's unemployment. Now, unemployment could exist at Y2. Unemployment could also exist at Y4 for the following reasons. But even if the economy is producing at Y4, it doesn't mean that everybody's employed. You might still have 10% of the population unemployed. So what's the government going to do? Is it going to reduce taxes further and try to increase the aggregate demand? It can't, because the economy is producing what it can. So do you now understand that before the government makes a policy, right, it has to understand where on this particular curve the national economy is pitched. If it happens to be on the horizontal part of the curve, then it might make sense to expand the economy. If it happens to be on the vertical part of the curve, the perfectly inelastic part of the curve, where there is no spare capacity whatsoever, all you're going to be doing is that the government's going to, by cutting taxes, is going to be fueling inflation. And if it happens to be on the sloping part of the curve, then there can be a trade-off between unemployment, which is this area, and inflation. This is the short-term aggregate supply. However, it does not necessarily, in theory at least, it does not work that way in the long run. Let us now take this diagram off the board, right, and we're going to do a simpler one showing what happens in the long run. Start again, because in the long run, what can happen is, other things being equal, and remember the use of the word ceteris paribus in economics, which means other things equal, everything is going through, things will eventually fall into balance. So, here we go. PL, Y equals GDP. This. In the short run, we said that the aggregate supply follows this curve. Right, let's just reproduce it again more simply, without all the APs on it. And there you go, AS. We'll call that the AS. Now, let us assume that the aggregate demand is at this point, right? And that the price level, which we said from last time, is here. And this is the price level, and this is the amount that's produced. Y1, or we'll call it Yx, right, to make it simple, and we'll call this PLX. Now, what is the position in the long run? Which means after the economy's been going up and down like this, right, boom, peak, recession, trough, boom, peak, recession, trough, up and down like a yo-yo. Theoretically, at least, it will follow this curve, which is the second aggregate supply curve. But this one is the LRAS, standing for the long run aggregate supply curve, whereas this one here, we are going to be naming the short run aggregate supply curve, SRAS. Now, what we saw was in the short run, because in the short run, sometimes we can get the economy in this stage, which is it's in recession. Let's say like this. Now, when the economy is in recession, right, and it's at AD1, right, we'll call this AD1, this is ADX, AD1, and it's in recession, what we're going to be having is PL1, Y1. And we can put it in this thing, the economy is not performing as well as it should be, because at the best possible level, when it's producing as much as it can, when it's on the production possibility frontier, meaning that the economy's range of goods and services added up together is about right for what the economy is capable of, then it's a YX. Here, it is producing below capability. So therefore we will say that this is a case of an economy which is in recession, and we will label this a recessionary gap. Right? And therefore, what the government should be considering is finding methods of moving the AD1 back to AD2. The range of what the government can do to move AD1 to AD2 are debated by economists, and we will look at this in the future in a future episode. Sufficient to say at this stage that some economists hold the view that the government should do nothing, because if the government's in recession, right, sometimes it can naturally come out of a recession without the government intervening. Other views, which is the Keynesian view, say that no, the government actually has to take action in order to be able to get the government out of recession. So that's one scenario. It can sometimes happen, though, that the economy is operating at this level, AD2. Now at AD2, you're getting a lot more people employed, so we'll call that Y2. But at the same time, what's happening is that the price level is too high, which is at PL2. So what we've actually got here is it's not a recessionary gap. We would call this an inflationary gap. Because the economy is overperforming. True, we've got more people, too many more people employed, but it's come at a big price, which is that it's actually pushed up inflation for the nation. So therefore, the government have got to come up with a policy of trying to get the AD back to AD2, to ADX, where you've got macroeconomic equilibrium, where the LRAS equals SRAS equals AD at that point. Now, there are various tricks that can do it. They might want to raise the interest rates. People can't borrow money cheaply. They might want to raise the taxes, so people have got less money to spend. And that would be in order to be able to bring AD2 back to ADX. So to summarize, the LRAS in the general view, which is a complex view, is that in the long run, all of the things being equal, this is the level the economy performs at, and at YX, we employ enough people in the national economy to produce YX irrespective of the number of people that actually are around looking for work. It might be that there's enough jobs for everybody to produce YX who's looking for work. It might be there's only enough jobs for 80% of the people. But if you've got enough people to produce, you're employing enough people to produce at YX, you have a fully employed economy. And that is the meaning of full employment according to economics. So ladies and gentlemen, this actually what we've actually seen is that we've seen aggregate supply in its greatest complexity. We have seen that in the long run, the aggregate supply should be the amount that the nation is capable of producing without any serious ill effects, such as creating an inflationary gap. That's at YX, irrespective of what the aggregate demand is. In the long run, that's eventually what the economy is going to be. In the short run, it will tend to go up and down like a yo-yo. Sometimes it's going to be an inflationary gap, sometimes it's going to be a recessionary gap. The role of the economist is firstly to try to take if it's an inflationary gap, to reduce the inflation, and it can use various tools. Sorry, when I say the economist, I mean the government minister of finance. Or if, as it's currently, it's in recession, to be able to find ways that you can heat the economy up by using various policies. What those policies are, we will actually see later. Alternatively, it might even try to move the long-run LRAS to the right, to make the economy bigger and help. That could solve everybody's problem. We will look at this later on in the course. So what we've now done is we've actually shown that what the macroeconomy is. There is a concept of macroeconomic equilibrium when AS, or rather SRAS, LRAS, and AD are completely in equilibrium, which means that the economy is doing as good as it can for now. We will now move on from here to consider policies in the next issues that the government can use in order to be able to fine-tune the economy. Thank you very much indeed, viewers and ladies and gentlemen and everybody else. Thank you very much. Oh, that should be a good one. Is it easier now than it was before? Okay. That wasn't a very good curve, but it wasn't bad enough.